This is the second half of Chapter 9 for microeconomics. We are applying consumer and producer surplus concepts to international trade. We ended on slide 16 from Chapter 9 before with figure 4 right here. And just to recap, before the tariff, if we have opened our borders and we are importing products, our domestic price is going to meet the world price. So we're looking at the world price, that blue line right there. And remember that consumer surplus is the area below demand and above price. So that's going to include areas A, B, C, D, E, and F. This is before the tariff with trade, and we're talking about consumer surplus. It'll include areas A, B, C, D, E, and F. Producer surplus with trade and without the tariff will only include that triangle G. Now when we add the tariff, it's going to shift the price up to that red line, that red tariff line, by the size of the tariff. So it could be $1, $2, or $3, whatever the size of the tariff is, it's going to shift it up. And now, again, we're still using the definitions of consumer surplus, the area below demand and above price. Consumer surplus with trade with the tariff is only going to be areas A and B. Producer surplus is actually going to grow with the tariff, and it will increase from just area G to G and C. Remember, it's the producer surplus is the area below price and above supply. So that just leaves areas D, E, and F. Well, who gets that? Let's take a look at that rectangle E. Remember, the size of the tariff is going to be how much our price shifts upward. So that's going to be the price. The quantity of the tariff is just going to be the quantity of imports because it is a tax on imports. And that is going to be the line represented from Q2S, and if you draw a horizontal line from Q2S to Q2D. So basically, if you take the area of rectangle E, that's going to go to the government in the form of tax revenue, or in this case, revenue from tariffs. And so who gets D and F? No one. That's the deadweight loss when we implement a tax, in this case of a tariff on imports. Okay, just to sum up, the effects of a tariff raises the price of the product, obviously because of the tariff. What's going to happen to the domestic quantity that's demanded? It will actually decrease. Domestic quantity supplied will actually increase. Let me go back to this slide. Before the tariff, domestic suppliers or producers, they were producing at a quantity of Q1S. And then after the tariff, they're actually going to be able to produce more. They'll be willing and able to produce more at Q2S. Now before the tariff, our domestic consumers were consuming at Q1D, and then after the tariff, you can see that that shrinks the quantity demanded a little bit, and now with the tariff, quantity demanded by domestic consumers is now at quantity Q2D. And to sum up, it makes domestic sellers better off, but buyers worse off. And we see that the tariff actually takes away some of those gains to trade. Some of it's going to go to the government, but then some of it is going to be deadweight loss that no one gets, as represented by those two triangles, D and F. The benefits to international trade are an increased variety of goods and services that we couldn't get before when we had our borders closed. We can have lower costs through economies of scale. This is a term that we'll talk about more in Chapter 13, but basically your costs go down as you produce more and more. And increased competition if consumers know that they can buy this product, the same product, from several different sellers, and an enhanced flow of ideas. So there are lots of benefits to trade. We can graph it and we can measure it and say that the gains are bigger than the losses, but here are specifically what do we mean when we say that there are gains to trade. Even though international trade is the norm, and a lot of countries recognize that there are gains to trade, there are still restrictions and policies that restrict trade. And here are some of the arguments that your author addresses at the end of this chapter. And he puts the argument in quotation marks, and then that's his counterpoint right underneath without the quotation marks. So the jobs argument is the first one, that when we trade with other countries, it takes away some of our domestic jobs. That is actually true, but economists say that there's some job creation. There are going to be different kinds of jobs, and some people might need to move to other industries. It tends to, when we open our borders and we have international trade, we tend to decrease the demand for jobs that require lower level skills, and we tend to increase the demand for jobs that require higher level skills. So different kinds of jobs are created, but yes, some will go away. The national security argument. Some might argue that this particular industry, for example, the steel industry, is vital for national security. That's the argument. And what an economist might say in response to that is, well, who is actually making the argument? Is it the steel maker, or are they actually concerned about national defense or national security? Another argument for restricting trade might be the infant industry argument. And this argument, the idea behind this argument is that new industries, so brand new industries, are just getting started. They need some government support to help them get started. Right, an economist would say, well, there's some difficulty in implementing this in practice. How do we pick which industries to provide support to? Is it going to be all businesses? How do we know which ones actually need help and which ones don't? And then how do we take away that support eventually? An economist might argue that protection or this government support is not necessary for an infant industry to grow, that firms often incur losses at first, and if they're going to survive, if they're going to be profitable in the future, they're going to have to find ways to maybe reduce costs or increase their revenue without government support. Another argument that somebody might make for restricting trade might be the unfair competition argument, that we have to make sure that all countries are playing by the same rules, that it's not fair if the government in another country is subsidizing production of a particular product, and that's why they can make that product and sell it for a cheaper price. And an economist might say, well, that might be happening, but we're still benefiting. If our country can benefit from another country's lower prices, we still benefit, and that actually increases surplus in our country, consumer surplus for our domestic consumers here, if they can buy a cheaper product from another country. And is that sustainable in the future? Maybe or maybe not for that country, but for now that would help increase consumer surplus in our country. Now, subsidies are one thing, but if we're talking about breaking rules in terms of exploiting child labor children and breaking child labor laws, then that's definitely a problem, and that's something that economists would definitely not agree with. Okay, another argument for restricting trade is protection as a bargaining chip, that we need to have trade restrictions in place, or we need to have the option of implementing trade restrictions to bargain with our trading partners. So if another country is doing something that we don't agree with, maybe violating child labor laws, or maybe violating human rights, maybe building nuclear weapons and they're not stopping when we tell them to, that we need to be able to place trade restrictions on them. Well, economists would say the threat may or may not work. They might not listen to us and continue building their nuclear weapons. If we do carry it through, then on our threats on trade restrictions, then we both lose out on the gains in trade. Now, if we don't follow through with our threats on trade restrictions and maybe trying to punish that other country, then we lose prestige in foreign affairs. So that's what your author has to say about several arguments for restricting trade. The last part of the chapter, your author mentions different approaches to achieving free trade. So, like I said, most countries see the benefits to trade and have removed a lot of trade restrictions on their own. The United States has also. We have much more open border, more open policies than we did even in the 50s and 60s in this country. And if you move your own trade restrictions in your own country, that's called a unilateral approach to achieve free trade. If you partner with several other countries, then that's called a multilateral approach to achieving free trade. And we have some examples of such agreements. So NAFTA, GATT, and there's some advantages to working with other countries in terms of organization, just to reduce trade restrictions in all of these countries. And that is the end of our notes for Chapter 9.